On August 14, 2018, a road maintenance crew began the routine task of clearing a long-abandoned drainage culvert along a decommissioned stretch of Highway 22, a vein of asphalt that cuts through the dense, unforgiving timber of the Pacific Northwest. It was a Tuesday. The sun was pale, the air smelled of damp cedar and old exhaust. At 10:43 a.m., the teeth of a hydraulic excavator caught on something that refused to yield. It wasn't stone, it wasn't a root, it was metal. Rusted, thinned by decades of acidic soil, but unmistakably the chassis of a vehicle. When the foreman peered into the cavity of the earth, he didn't see a modern wreck. He saw a window into 1988. He saw a door handle that had not been turned in 30 years. He saw the end of a silence that had haunted the state for a generation. The Miller family, Thomas, Sarah, and 7-year-old Leo, had not simply moved away. They had not started a new life. They were right where the road had claimed them, hidden beneath 3 decades of sediment and indifference. The discovery was impossible. This road had been searched, this culvert had been inspected, or so the records claimed. The mountains do not offer apologies. They only offer remains. To understand the gravity of that Tuesday in 2018, we must return to the morning the world lost track of the Millers. October 12, 1988, 6:15 a.m. Thomas Miller was a man of precision. An aerospace engineer by trade, he lived his life by the checklist. His 1985 Ford Econoline van was a testament to his obsession with readiness. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a survival pod. He had outfitted it with dual batteries, a CB radio, and enough emergency rations to last a month. He knew the terrain, he knew the risks, he was the expert, he was prepared. And yet preparation is a fragile shield against the unknown. At 7:30 a.m., the van was captured on a grainy security feed at a gas station in Morton. Thomas is seen checking the tire pressure. Sarah is seen buying 2 apples and a box of crackers. Leo is seen waving at the camera, a small, blurry ghost in a red jacket. This is the last digital footprint of their existence. No signal, no trace, just silence. They were heading for the High Divide, a route Thomas had driven a dozen times. The weather forecast was clear. The van was in peak condition. By 9 p.m. that night, they were expected at a cabin in Packwood. They never arrived. The void began at the moment they turned off the main artery and into the shadows of the pines. For 30 years, the case sat in a filing cabinet, a collection of dead ends and wild theories. Some said they fled to Canada. Some said they were victims of a random act of violence. The investigators of the era looked for skid marks. They looked for broken branches. They found nothing. The road was a clean slate, but the mountains keep their secrets until they are ready to scream. When the forensic team began the extraction in 2018, they didn't just find a van. They found a time capsule of terror and domesticity. The evidence log reads like a poem of the mundane. One blue plastic thermos, half filled with what used to be coffee. A child's coloring book, its pages fused together by moisture. A map of the Olympic Peninsula, meticulously highlighted in yellow ink. A camera with 24 frames of undeveloped film. As the investigators sifted through the silt, the modern observer notices the irony. The very van that Thomas had reinforced to be a fortress had become their tomb. The heavy-duty roof rack, designed to carry extra fuel, had snagged on a falling hemlock during a freak mudslide, dragging the vehicle into the ravine with such surgical precision that it disappeared from the line of sight of any searcher standing more than 10 feet away. The mud had sealed the entrance. The forest had grown over the exit. Imagine you are standing on that road in 1988, calling their names while they are 12 feet below your boots, separated by a layer of earth and the indifference of gravity. Why would they stay in the van? The forensic reconstruction suggests the impact was not immediately fatal for everyone. The metadata of their final moments is written in the positions of the bodies. Thomas was found in the driver's seat, his hands still near the ignition. Sarah was in the back, her arms wrapped around Leo. The most haunting discovery was a small notebook found in Sarah's lap. The ink had bled, but the indentations remained. A final log. 11:40 a.m. Slide came out of nowhere. Van is pinned. Thomas is hurt. It's so dark. 2:15 p.m. We tried the radio. No one hears. Leo is sleeping. 6 p.m. It's getting cold. We are waiting for the lights. We know you are coming. They were waiting for a rescue that was standing right on top of them, unable to see through the veil of the earth. The mountains don't explain why. They don't explain why the search dogs missed the scent, or why the 1988 infrared sweeps failed to pick up the heat signatures before the batteries died and the cabin grew cold. The forensic image of the scene shows a family that did everything right. They stayed together. They conserved their resources. They waited for the world to find them. The world just took 30 years too long. As we look at the macro shots of the rusted hinges and the moss-covered tires, we are forced to confront the limits of human agency. Thomas Miller was the expert victim. He had the gear, he had the knowledge, he had the will. But he was fighting a geography that does not play by the rules of engineering. The reconstruction of the narrative truth tells us that the Millers didn't die from a lack of preparation, but from a surplus of bad luck. A single tree, a single pocket of unstable soil, a single moment of geological shifting. The open loop remains. How many others are currently resting just inches beneath the perception of the living? The moral warning is etched into the rust of the econoline. We believe we have conquered the wild with our GPS, our reinforced steel, and our checklists. We believe that to be prepared is to be safe, but the earth is old and it is patient. It moves in its own time, swallowing the prepared and the unprepared alike. The Miller family is finally home, their names carved in stone rather than ink on a missing person's flyer. But the woods are still there, the culverts are still waiting, and the mountains, as always, keep their secrets. For 30 years, the case was a void in the state's history, a cold case that defied every search party and every psychic. Then, on August 14, 2018, the silence broke. A road maintenance crew tasked with clearing a drainage culvert on a decommissioned logging spur near Highway 22 felt the grinding of steel against steel. The excavator pulled back a mass of tangled hemlock roots and rusted iron. It was a roof rack, then a door. Then the realization that they had uncovered a tomb. The discovery was impossible because this specific stretch of road had been surveyed a dozen times in 1988. Searchers had walked this exact line. They had looked down into the ravine. They had seen nothing but shadows and moss. The mountains keep their secrets through a process of natural camouflage, layering time and decay over the mistakes of man. The forensic reveal began at 10:43 a.m. that Tuesday, as the foreman looked into the dark interior of the van and saw the remains of a life interrupted. To understand the void, one must look at the timestamps. 6:15 a.m. The Millers leave their driveway. 7:42 a.m. A gas station receipt in Morton shows a purchase of 22 gallons of unleaded fuel and 2 red apples. 9:03 a.m. A park ranger logs a tan van entering the forest boundary. After that, the timeline dissolves into the ether. The investigation in 1988 was exhaustive. Hundreds of volunteers combed the slopes. Helicopters equipped with then state-of-the-art thermal imaging flew patterns over the high divide. No heat signatures, no smoke from a signal fire, no tire tracks leading off the shoulder. The road was a clean slate. The lead investigator at the time, a man who would retire with the Miller file still on his desk, obsessed over the lack of physical evidence. No signal, no trace, just silence. He often noted that a 3-ton vehicle does not simply evaporate, but it had. The disappearance created a vacuum that was filled with decades of speculation, theories of intentional flight, of foul play, of something more inexplicable. Yet, the truth was far more mundane and far more horrific. The mountains don't explain why, they only wait. When the van was finally winched from the earth in 2018, the forensic team treated it as a crime scene, though the only culprit was gravity. The vehicle had been wedged into a natural limestone pocket, then buried by a localized mudslide triggered by the very storm that had moved through the region on the night of their disappearance. For 30 years, the forest had reclaimed the site, Trees had grown through the wheel wells. Moss had woven a carpet over the windows. The reconstruction began with the evidence log, a somber cataloging of the items found within the silt-filled cabin. A blue plastic thermos, its seal still intact, containing the residue of black coffee. A child's red jacket, faded to a dull pink. A structural engineering manual, its pages fused into a solid block of cellulose. These items humanized the tragedy, turning a cold case into a living memory. The forensic investigators, acting as proxies for a public that had long forgotten the Millers, noted the rule of irony. Thomas Miller had spent thousands of dollars making his van the safest vehicle on the road. He had installed a CB radio with a long-range antenna. But when the slide hit, the antenna was snapped instantly by a falling branch. The heavy-duty reinforced doors designed to survive a high-speed collision were pinned shut by the weight of 3 tons of saturated earth. His strengths were his undoing. He was trapped in a cage of his own design. The narrative truth is found in the granular details of the final hours. Forensic analysis of the van's interior suggests that the impact was not immediately fatal. The family survived the initial slide. The position of the remains tells a story of desperate, methodical survival. Thomas was found in the driver's seat, his fingers still curled around the handle of a manual winch he had tried to use to force the door. Sarah and Leo were in the rear living area, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket. The expert victim had done everything right. He had checked the seals, he had rationed the water, he had kept his family warm, but he was trapped in a vertical tomb, 12 feet below the surface of a road where searchers were currently standing. The most haunting piece of evidence was a small spiral-bound notebook found tucked into the pocket of the passenger door. Sarah Miller had kept a log. 11:14 p.m. The earth moved. We are stuck. Thomas says the winch will work. 2:30 a.m. The water is coming in from the floor. Leo is brave. We are waiting for the light. 6 a.m. We hear the helicopters. Why don't they see us? We are right here. The question that haunts the investigators today is, how did the thermal imaging miss them? The answer is as cold as the soil. The mudslide was rich in clay and dense minerals, acting as a natural insulator. The heat of 3 human bodies was masked by the cold, wet earth. They were invisible to the world. The mountains don't offer apologies, they only offer remains. As the forensic team concluded their work, the investigators noted that the tragedy wasn't just in the death, but in the proximity of life. For 3 decades, thousands of cars had driven over that culvert. People had stopped to stretch their legs or take photos of the view, standing inches away from the roof of the van where the Millers had waited for a rescue that never came. The forensic casual tone of the final report masks a deeper melancholia. It uses terms like GPS drift and sedimentary compaction to explain away a nightmare. It concludes that the Millers died of hypothermia approximately 48 hours after the slide. They spent 2 days in total darkness, listening to the world above them, waiting for a door to open. Imagine you are standing on that road, looking out at the pines, feeling the solid ground beneath your feet. You believe you are safe because you are prepared. You believe you are visible because you have a phone in your pocket. But the Miller case serves as a moral warning. Preparation is a thin veil, the earth is patient, and the forest is deep. We are all just one slide away from becoming a timestamp in a future investigator's log. The mountains keep their secrets, and sometimes they never let them go. To look deeper into the forensic logs of 1988 is to confront the terrifying precision of failure. The search grid for October 14, 1988 shows that a ground team designated as Echo 7 passed within 20 feet of the burial site at 2:15 p.m. The logs indicate the weather was deteriorating. Visibility was less than 50 yards. The searchers noted in their afternoon report that the terrain near the culvert was, quote, zero. They did not know that beneath the roots of a giant cedar, a family was screaming into the upholstery of a Ford Econoline. The ground team's boots literally compressed the very mud that served as the Miller's ceiling. Forensic acoustics experts in 2019 attempted to simulate whether a cry for help could have reached the surface. The result was somber. The wet clay and the density of the van's insulation acted as a perfect sound dampener. To the searchers, the mountain was silent. To the Millers, the mountain was a tomb that amplified the sound of footsteps they couldn't reach. The thermal imaging logs from the 1988 air search reveal a further layer of tragedy. Helicopter Unit 4 swept the High Divide at 11 p.m. on October 13th. The sensor data, reviewed 30 years later with modern enhancement software, shows a faint circular anomaly exactly where the van was buried. In 1988, this was dismissed as ground clutter or thermal bleed from a decaying stump. The tech was too primitive to distinguish between the dying heat of a human life and the natural warmth of the earth. The investigation also recovered a 35mm camera from the floor of the van. The film, though damaged by decades of moisture, yielded 3 grainy, haunting images. The first shows Leo asleep in the back, his face peaceful, unaware of the vertical miles between him and the sky. The second is a shot of the driver's side window, completely black, save for the reflection of the van's dome light against the mud pressed against the glass. The third and final frame is a blur of motion, Thomas's hand reaching for the camera, perhaps trying to document their position for whoever might find them. It is a testament to the human instinct to be seen, even when the world has already looked away. Why did the search dogs fail? The records show a K9 unit was deployed on October 16th. By then, the storm had washed away any surface scent. The mud had sealed the vehicle's vents, trapping the olfactory evidence inside a steel box. The mountains don't explain why, they simply remain. The modern investigator looks at the metadata of these failures and sees a pattern of invisible barriers. The 2018 discovery didn't just find bodies, it found a record of a society's technological hubris. We believe our tools make us omniscient, but the earth knows how to hide what it wants to keep. The forensic image of the culvert today is a scar on the landscape, a reminder that the mundane act of driving a road is a gesture of faith in a ground that can at any moment become a ceiling. The Millers didn't vanish into thin air, they vanished into thick earth. They were right there. They were always right there. Behind every cold case file is a grieving investigator, a proxy for the family who never came home. Detective Elias Thorne was 26 when the Miller van disappeared. He was 68 when it was found. Thorne's personal journals, donated to the state archives after the recovery, reveal a man who had become a chronicler of ghosts. He spent his weekends driving the High Divide in a car identical to Thomas Miller's, trying to find the one turn he might have missed. He obsessed over the granular details of the 1988 weather patterns, mapping the barometric pressure drops to the minutiae. He believed that the truth was hidden in the metadata of the forest. In his 1994 entry, he wrote, "The mountains are not a place, they are a condition. They don't take people, they simply allow people to lose themselves." Thorne's obsession led him to study geomorphology, trying to understand how a 3-ton van could leave no footprint. He was the first to suggest, in a 2002 memo that was largely ignored, that the search teams were looking on the mountain when they should have been looking in it. He recognized the rule of irony long before the forensic team did. He saw Thomas Miller not as a victim of incompetence, but as a victim of his own engineering. Thomas had trusted the road because it was built to certain specifications. He had trusted his van because it was tested against certain forces, but there is no specification for the weight of a mountain. Thorne was there in 2018 when the excavator pulled the first piece of rusted steel from the culvert. He didn't celebrate. He stood at a respectful distance, a man who had finally found the missing piece of a puzzle that had cost him his youth. He noted the macro shots of the sediment, the way the dirt had polished the chrome over 30 years, turning a family vehicle into a relic of the geological record. He looked at the camera, the thermos, and the notebook not as evidence, but as relics of a failed prophecy. The mountains keep their secrets, but Thorne had spent a lifetime learning their language. His final report, written shortly before his death in 2021, remains the definitive analysis of the Miller disappearance. The recovery of the Millers concludes the forensic history of a tragedy but it opens a deeper existential wound. The final reconstruction of the Miller case is not found in the recovery of bodies, but in the recovery of the narrative truth. The quote 4 and the quote 5 finally occupy the same space. The van, now a hollowed-out shell in a police impound lot, serves as a monument to the mundane horror of being forgotten. Forensic teams closed the file on November 12, 2018. The cause of death was officially listed as exposure, but for those who study the metadata of the High Divide, the cause was something else: the mountain's indifference. The conclusion is not a release, but a reminder. We build our lives on the surface of a world that is constantly shifting, folding, and burying. The Miller family did everything right, and they still disappeared into the void. Their legacy is a warning etched in rust. No signal, no trace, just silence. The mountains don't explain why. They only wait for the next traveler who believes they are prepared. To further quantify the horror, consider the depth of the burial. Soil density reports indicate the van was under 400,000 pounds of pressure. This was not a soft burial. It was a geological event. The forensic image of the site shows that the root systems of the surrounding trees had actually begun to encase the metal, feeding on the minerals of the rust. The forest was literally consuming the evidence. The grieving investigator, Elias Thorne, once theorized that the mountain intentionally hides what it breaks. He pointed to the fact that the slide occurred in a blind spot of the topography, a natural acoustic and visual shadow where even the most advanced sonar would bounce off the sheer limestone walls instead of penetrating the soft mud. The metadata of 1988 is a record of near misses. It is a record of a family that checked every box on a survival list, only to realize that the list was written for a world that no longer applied to them. Imagine the silence inside that van after the batteries finally died, the ticking of the metal as it cooled, the slow, rhythmic sound of water dripping into the footwell. It is a silence that lasted 30 years. It is a silence that we only broke because we needed to fix a pipe. The moral warning stands: we are never as safe as our technology tells us we are. We are guests in a landscape that has no memory of us and no obligation to keep us. The Miller family is a ghost story told in technical terms, a chronicle of the impossible discovery that proved the mountains never forget. They only wait for the right time to speak.